Princess Sorin stood alone beneath the twin moons of Lumeris, her silver skin glowing faintly under the violet sky. The garden around her was silent, too silent. The crystal flowers, which once shimmered brightly at her touch, now seemed to droop in the absence of her presence. The wind whispered through the tall, glowing trees, as if mourning the loss of the life that had once thrived here. Her heart felt heavier than it ever had before. The light that had once illuminated her path, both literally and figuratively, had begun to dim. She could feel it in her bones. They had rejected her. Sorin's eyes wandered over the sprawling gardens of the palace. The city of Lumeris was spread out before her, bathed in the cold light of the twin moons. It was beautiful, a place that she had once known to be a reflection of the strength and power of her family. But today, it felt like a prison. The voices in her head were louder than ever, echoes of the council's judgment that still rang fresh in her ears. Unfit. Weak. Genetically compromised. She shuddered, the words that had torn through her like a blade, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had never been perfect, never the ideal that her people had hoped for, but she had always tried to be what they wanted her to be. She had failed. Her thoughts swirled in a fog of hopelessness as she walked slowly toward the edge of the garden. The once vibrant glow that had marked her skin as a sign of her noble blood had dimmed significantly over the last few weeks. The council had said it was a sign of weakness. Her betrothed had abandoned her. Her people had turned their backs. All that remained was a girl who had been born to rule, now abandoned by her destiny. She reached the edge of the garden where the land dropped sharply into the great ravine below. The moonlight shimmered on the distant water far beneath, an endless, vast expanse of dark blue. She could have jumped. No one would miss her. No one would care. Her breath caught in her throat. The thought had crossed her mind too many times in recent days, and yet it was always too much to bear. Her pride, her duty, they wouldn't allow her to do it. But the ache in her chest, the suffocating weight of being unwanted, still gnawed at her. Was this how her story was meant to end? Princess Sorin. Her name broke the quiet like a crack of thunder. She spun around, startled. Standing at the far edge of the garden in the shadow of the palace walls was a figure, a human. Elias Ward. She recognized him immediately, though he was one of the last people she expected to see here. Elias was an exile from Earth, stranded on Lumeris after his ship crashed beyond the Dominion's borders. He wasn't meant to be here, among the noble people of Lumeris. He was an outsider, an unwanted guest. But it was also Elias who had been the only one to show her any kindness in these dark days. When the council had first demanded his execution, after he had been captured for trespassing, it had been Sorin who stepped in. She had fought for his life, told them that no human should be treated like a criminal for simply being lost. She had saved him, and yet now he was the only one left who had not abandoned her. Elias took a step toward her, his expression soft but weary. His uniform, stained with the grime of a long day's work, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. But even in that rough appearance, there was something about him that caught her breath. He didn't look away. "Princess," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I thought I'd find you here." Sorin blinked, fighting the tightness in her throat. "I didn't ask for your company, human." Elias smiled, but it was a sad, knowing smile. "I know, but I'm here anyway." She wanted to snap at him, tell him to leave, to go back to the palace where he belonged, where he wouldn't be bothered by someone like her. But something in the way he stood there, so unafraid, so unwilling to let her push him away, made her pause. "I don't belong here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never did. The council made that clear." Elias stepped closer, the faintest rustle of his boots on the soft ground breaking the stillness. "You think you don't belong?" he asked. His eyes held an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're wrong, Sorin. You belong here more than anyone, but you can't do this alone. No one can." The words struck her, the pain in her chest intensifying for a moment. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly, unwilling to show any weakness. She had been trained for this, to be strong, to bear the weight of her title. But Elias, he wasn't like the others. He didn't look at her like she was broken, like a failure. He looked at her like she was still worth something. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Soren felt seen. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. Elias stood still for a moment, his gaze steady. "Because you're worth it, all of you. Your people might not see it, but I do." He took another step forward, his presence a comforting, solid weight at her side. "I know what it feels like to be rejected, but you don't have to carry this alone, Soren." She looked at him, really looked at him. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment, just compassion. A human standing there, offering her the one thing she had lost, understanding. Soren's glow dimmed further, and she felt something shift inside her. The faintest spark of hope, like a flickering candle in the dark. Maybe she wasn't entirely alone after all. Elias smiled again, the same sad but gentle smile. "I'll be here," he said simply, "as long as you need me." And for the first time in weeks, Soren felt like she might have a reason to keep going. The days that followed were a blur for Princess Soren. The council's rejection still stung, but Elias was always there, like a steady anchor in the storm. He wasn't royalty, he wasn't noble, but he was real, something Soren had begun to realize she hadn't had much of in her life. Real kindness, real friendship. And it was this that made the emptiness inside her seem a little less overwhelming. It was strange how one person could change everything. Elias was a human, an outsider in every sense of the word. His skin was rough, scarred from years of space travel and mercenary work. His clothes were simple, worn from constant use. And yet he carried a strength that no one in the palace had ever shown her. He didn't care that she was the daughter of kings. He didn't care that her bloodline was supposed to be pure. He didn't care that she was rejected by everyone who mattered. He cared about her. Soren found herself seeking his company more and more. She would slip away from the palace on quiet evenings, to the outskirts of the gardens, where she knew Elias would be working on repairs or tinkering with machines he'd salvaged from the wrecked city. There, they would sit together in the silence, the two of them, and talk. Or sometimes, they would say nothing at all, just sharing the peaceful moment of being with someone who didn't expect anything from her. One evening, as the light from the twin moons bathed the city in soft hues of purple and gold, Soren sat beside him, watching him work. His hands moved with practiced precision as he adjusted the circuit board of a damaged machine. The quiet hum of the power generator buzzed in the background, but the moment felt peaceful, like a gentle lullaby in the chaos of her life. "I never thought I'd end up here," Elias said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, thoughtful. "On this planet among aliens with you." Soren's heart skipped a beat at the mention of herself. "You think I'm an alien?" He chuckled softly, not looking up from his work. "Well, yeah, you're not from Earth." "I meant, do you think of me as different?" she asked, her voice tight. He stopped working for a moment, finally looking at her. His gaze was steady, his eyes full of understanding. "No," he said simply. "You're not different, you're just you, and that's enough for me." The words hit her harder than she expected. She blinked, trying to hold back the sudden rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Enough. The word lingered in her mind like a balm to her wounded spirit. It had been so long since anyone had said something like that to her, that she was enough, just as she was. Her people had made her feel as though she was never enough, no matter how hard she tried. But Elias didn't see her that way. He didn't judge her for her dimming glow, for her failure to live up to expectations. He saw her for who she truly was, a person. Soren's heart ached with the sudden warmth of it all. Her glow flickered, brightening for a moment as she took in a deep breath. She didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming urge to be closer to him. She shifted slightly, moving a little closer to where he sat. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "why are you still here?" He didn't hesitate, his expression soft and sincere. Because you saved my life, and because you deserve more than what you've been given. You deserve a chance. A chance. The word echoed in her mind, bringing a mixture of hope and sadness. What chance did she have now? Her life had been laid out before her since birth, to rule, to marry a highborn prince, to lead her people. And now that chance was gone. Her future, once so clear, had crumbled to dust. Soren wanted to scream, to throw herself at the stars and demand something more. But all she could do was sit there, feeling the weight of everything that had been taken from her. Elias reached out, his rough hand gently brushing hers. The touch was warm, and for the first time in a long time it grounded her. He didn't pull away. He didn't hesitate. He just let her know, with that simple gesture, that he was there. Soren turned her hand, her fingers lightly intertwining with his. It felt natural, like this was where she was supposed to be with him, here, now. She leaned her head back against the stone wall of the garden, her eyes closing as she let out a slow breath. The moons above shone down on them, casting their light like a protective cloak over their heads. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted, her voice small. "You don't have to know right now," Elias replied, his voice low but firm. "You've been carrying the weight of an entire world on your shoulders. Maybe it's time to let someone else help." Soren opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. She had always believed she had to carry everything alone, the title, the expectations, the burden of being a perfect princess. But Elias wasn't asking her to be perfect. He was asking her to be herself. And maybe that was enough. For the first time in a long time, Soren felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to hope for. She felt like she could breathe again. There was still a future, even if it wasn't the one she had imagined. She wasn't sure where it would lead or what would happen next, but with Elias beside her, she felt like maybe she could face it. A quiet smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Elias smiled back, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just here to help." And in that moment, in the quiet of the garden, under the twin moons of Lumeris, Soren realized something she hadn't allowed herself to understand before. Maybe it wasn't the perfect world she had dreamed of, but with Elias by her side, maybe it was enough. The days grew longer on Lumeris, but the weight of the twin moons above seemed to press harder on Princess Soren's heart. The aftermath of the council's rejection had left a scar on her soul, but it wasn't just the loss of her place among her people that haunted her. It was the fear that she had become a shadow of the person she used to be, someone who once held the future in her hands, now left with nothing but uncertainty. But then there was Elias. Every day he was there, quietly working on his repairs, or teaching her little things about Earth that she had never known. How the stars on his homeworld were different from hers. How they had oceans and forests, real, tangible places where life wasn't ruled by genetics or royal bloodlines. How humans, despite everything, still managed to hold on to hope. Soren found herself drawn to him more with each passing day. There was something about Elias that made her feel seen, not for her title or her heritage, but for who she truly was. The days spent with him in the quiet of the gardens, talking or sitting in peaceful silence, became her sanctuary. One afternoon, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of orange and red, Soren found herself walking toward Elias. He was crouched beside a broken power generator, his hands steady as he worked on the delicate circuits. His face was focused, his brow furrowed, but when he saw her approach, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Hey," he greeted, standing up and wiping his hands on his worn-out pants. "What's up?" Soren hesitated for a moment, not sure how to put her thoughts into words. She had never been good at expressing herself, not in moments like these. But with Elias it was different. Somehow, the words came easier. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "about everything. The council, my people. I've been taught my whole life that I was meant for something great, that I had a destiny. And now I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Elias leaned against the generator, his eyes softening as he listened. "Destiny's a heavy word," he said quietly, "but it's also a tricky one. No one's destiny is set in stone, not even yours. You've got the power to choose what happens next." Soren stared at him, uncertainty clouding her features. "But I've lost everything. My family, my title, my future. What choice do I have?" Elias stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "The choice is still yours, always." His touch was warm and steady, and for a brief moment, Soren let herself lean into it. She didn't want to feel weak, but in that moment, she felt like she was crumbling under the pressure of everything that had happened. She had been the one everyone had looked to for answers, for leadership. But now, all she wanted was someone to hold her together. "I don't know if I can go on like this," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Elias said firmly, "more than you know." Soren's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long time she felt something stir inside her. Not just hope, but a spark of strength, a glimmer of the woman she had once been, before everything fell apart. The woman who had fought for what she believed in. The woman who had dreamed of a future that was hers and hers alone. "Elias," she murmured, stepping back slightly to meet his gaze fully. "I don't want to feel like I'm lost forever. I don't want to be the person I am now. I want to do something. I want to be someone again." He smiled, the warmth in his eyes never wavering. "Then be. You don't need anyone's permission, Soren, just you." The simplicity of his words struck her deeply. Elias wasn't asking her to be perfect. He wasn't asking her to fix everything. He was simply telling her that it was okay to be herself, to make her own decisions, to stop waiting for others to decide her fate. The realization washed over her like a wave, and for the first time in months, Soren didn't feel like a prisoner of her circumstances. She felt free, as if something had unshackled her, allowing her to breathe again. "I've spent too long listening to what everyone else thinks I should be," she said, a quiet resolve growing in her chest. "It's time I listened to myself." Elias' expression softened and he reached out to gently take her hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes. It wasn't just an offer of comfort. It was a promise. A promise that, no matter what, she wouldn't have to face this alone. For a moment, they stood in the silence of the garden, the air heavy with unspoken words. The weight of the world hadn't disappeared, but now, with Elias beside her, Soren knew she could face it. The fear that had once gripped her heart began to loosen, and the tiniest spark of hope ignited within her once more. "I don't know what will happen next," she said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision she was beginning to make. "But I know that I want to find out. I want to do this, whatever it is, with you." Elias squeezed her hand, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I'll be here, Soren. You don't have to go through it alone." For the first time in a long time, Soren smiled. A real smile, not out of duty, but from something deep inside her. It wasn't the smile of a princess, or a ruler, or a daughter of kings. It was the smile of a woman, finally free to make her own choices. And with Elias by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could find her way again. The morning after Soren made her decision, the air in the capital of Lumeris felt heavier than ever. The usual hum of the city was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The twin moons, once bright and steady in the sky, now seemed to hang low as though anticipating something terrible. The signs had been building for days, whispers of a threat, a growing unrest among the stars. But no one, not even the council, had anticipated what would come next. Soren had been sitting in the quiet corner of the garden with Elias, talking about the future, when the first tremor hit. The ground shook beneath them, sending birds scattering into the sky. The peaceful moment shattered as the palace walls groaned and the distant city skyline shuddered. "What's happening?" Soren gasped, her heart racing. Elias stood, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. The sky was darkening quickly, not from the setting sun but from something far worse. The air seemed to buzz, charged with tension. "I don't know," Elias muttered, his voice tense. But it's not good. Before Soren could ask another question, the ground rumbled again, this time more violently. The sound of screaming echoed through the air, followed by the unmistakable roar of explosions. Soren's breath caught in her throat. Something was attacking. "It's them," Elias said, his face pale. "The Karth Dominion, they're here." Soren's blood ran cold at the name. The Karth were ruthless, a race of conquerors who had long coveted the resources of Lumeris. The peace that had reigned in the Dominion for centuries was about to be torn apart. She didn't have to see the enemy to know that war had arrived. "We need to get to the palace," Soren said, turning to Elias, her voice shaking with the weight of the words. "Now." Without another word, Elias grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the safety of the inner palace gates. The streets were filled with chaos. Soldiers, citizens, and servants scrambled for cover, while blasts of energy shot through the air, lighting up the sky in bursts of green and purple. The once pristine city now felt like a war zone. Elias moved quickly, pulling Soren with him as they navigated through the crowded streets. Her heart pounded in her chest. Fear gnawed at her, but there was something else growing inside her too, a sense of urgency. She had always been the one to be protected, to lead from a distance. But now, with the Karth at their doorstep, she realized that she couldn't just stand by. She had to do something. "We're almost there," Elias said, his grip firm on her hand. "Just stay close." They reached the palace gates just as another explosion rocked the city, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Soren stumbled but was caught by Elias, his strength keeping her steady. The gates were locked, but Elias didn't hesitate. With a quick motion, he pulled a small device from his belt and began to work on the control panel. "We don't have much time," he muttered. Soren's eyes scanned the horizon, her pulse quickening as she saw the shadowy figures of the Karth forces closing in on the palace. There was no time to wait. "I'll hold them off," Elias said, his voice low but determined. "You get inside, find shelter." "No," Soren said, her voice firm despite the fear rising within her. "I'm not leaving you out here alone." He looked at her, his face softening for a moment. "I'm not leaving you behind either, but you have to be safe." She met his gaze, and for a long moment they simply stood there, understanding passing between them. There was no time for words now, only action. With a final click, the gate sprang open. Elias shoved it aside and grabbed Soren's hand, pulling her into the safety of the palace grounds. But before they could take another step, a Karth soldier appeared from the smoke, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. Soren's heart stopped for a moment. The Karth were formidable warriors, their strength enhanced by cybernetic enhancements and vicious training. This one was armed with a long, curved blade, the edge gleaming in the dying light. Elias immediately stepped in front of her, his weapon already drawn. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and steady. But Soren couldn't stay behind him. She had been running from her destiny for too long. She wasn't going to let anyone else protect her now. She stepped forward, her own weapon, a ceremonial blade she had always kept for show, clutched tightly in her hand. "Elias," she whispered, her voice shaking but determined, "I'm not just a princess anymore. I'm someone who can fight for what's mine." The Karth soldier lunged toward them with a savage roar, his blade raised high. Elias fired, hitting the soldier square in the chest, but the Karth didn't falter. He was a machine. Soren didn't hesitate. With a battle cry, she rushed forward, using the knowledge she had gained in her training, the years of lessons that had once seemed useless, now finally coming to life. The two blades clashed with a sharp, metallic sound. She felt the shock of the impact in her arms, but she didn't back down. The fight was a blur. Elias was beside her, his gun blazing as they fought to hold their ground. Soren's heart raced, but there was no fear in her now. There was only fire, a burning need to protect, to fight, to prove that she was more than the girl who had been rejected. Together, they brought the Karth soldier to the ground. The palace was under siege, but Soren felt something change inside her. She was no longer the broken princess hiding in the shadows. She was a warrior fighting for her home, and for the first time she knew what it meant to truly lead. She turned to Elias, her chest heaving with exertion. "We can't stop now," she said, her voice full of resolve. "We fight until it's over." He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Together," he said simply. And with that, they charged forward into the heart of the battle, ready to face whatever came next. The battle for Lumeris raged on. The Karth forces were relentless, tearing through the city's defenses with terrifying precision. But Sauron, standing shoulder to shoulder with Elias, refused to back down. Every step they took was a struggle, but every step was also a victory. The once pristine streets of her home were now filled with smoke, fire, and the cries of her people. But she had a new resolve, a new strength she had never known before. Elias was beside her, always watching her back, his steady presence a comfort she didn't realize she needed. He had been her rock in this storm, and though the odds were stacked against them, he didn't hesitate. They fought together, human and princess, warrior and protector. They had fought off the first wave of Karth soldiers, their weapons slashing through the air in perfect harmony. Sauron's ceremonial blade, once a symbol of her nobility, now felt like an extension of herself. The power she had once given away in the name of duty, she had reclaimed in this fight. She could feel the fire of her ancestors burning inside her. She was not broken. She was not weak. She was a force to be reckoned with. But the battle wasn't over. The Karth kept coming. "I need to get to the command center," Sauron shouted over the roar of the battle. Her voice was urgent, filled with the weight of leadership she had never truly embraced before. The palace was the heart of the Dominion, and if they could reclaim it, they could push the Karth back. Elias nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I'll cover you." He moved first, taking down a Karth soldier with precise shots from his blaster as he led the way through the smoke-filled streets. Sauron followed, her heart pounding in her chest as the sounds of combat filled her ears. She had never felt so alive, so ready to take back what was hers. As they neared the palace, the air grew thick with tension. The Karth were everywhere, and the palace gates, once grand and welcoming, were now a crumbled mess of rubble. The Karth had breached the palace defenses, but Sauron refused to let them take her home. Elias shot again, clearing a path through the enemy, but they were closing in. She could see the fear in the eyes of her people, but there was something else too. They were starting to fight back, inspired by the princess who was no longer just a symbol. She was a warrior. Sauron's hand clenched around the hilt of her blade as she ran toward the palace doors. "We're almost there," she shouted, determination lighting her face. Elias was right behind her, guarding her every step. As they reached the gates, a Karth soldier stepped into their path, towering over them. His armor gleamed with menacing red lines, and his blade was massive, sharp enough to cut through steel. Elias raised his blaster, but the soldier was fast, knocking the weapon out of his hands in one swift movement. "Stay back," Elias shouted to Sauron, but she refused to listen. She stepped forward, raising her own blade in defiance. "You won't stop me," Sauron said, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering in her chest. The Karth soldier looked down at her, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. But then he attacked. The clash of metal rang through the air. Sauron was quick, her blade moving in calculated strikes, but the Karth soldier was strong, his strikes relentless. She could feel the power behind each blow, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. The battle between them was fierce, a dance of life and death. Elias was there, helping where he could, trying to find an opening in the Karth soldier's defenses. Sauron's breath came in ragged gasps, her body aching, but she pushed forward. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Lumeris, for everything she had lost, for everything she still had. Finally, with a roar, she found the opening she needed. She darted forward, her blade slashing through the air in a move that felt like second nature. The Karth soldier's armor crumpled beneath the strike, and with a final, swift movement, she plunged her blade into his chest. He fell to the ground with a heavy thud, his lifeless body crumpling at her feet. For a moment there was silence. Elias stepped forward, his eyes wide with both pride and concern. "That was incredible," he said, his voice low. Soren turned to him, her face a mix of exhaustion and determination. "It wasn't just me," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "You were with me." Elias' gaze softened as he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll always be with you, Soren." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just gratitude or friendship. It was something deeper, something that had been growing between them since the day they met. Elias wasn't just her protector anymore. He was something more. He was the reason she still had hope, the reason she fought. "Why do you care?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "Why are you still here, fighting for me when no one else would?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Because you're worth it, you always have been." The words hit her harder than she expected. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't out of sadness. It was something else, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the overwhelming realization that, despite everything, she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Soren reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You don't have to do anything alone," Elias replied, his voice firm and full of promise. The sound of more explosions echoed in the distance, and Soren knew they couldn't stop now. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. With Elias by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. "We'll win this," she said, her voice strong. "Together." And with that they moved forward, their bond stronger than ever, ready to fight for their future. The battle had reached its peak. The once beautiful city of Lumeris had become a war zone, a shadow of its former self. The Karth had pushed deep into the heart of the capital, but despite the overwhelming odds, Soren and Elias had not faltered. They had fought together, side by side, their bond growing stronger with every passing moment. The palace, which had once been a symbol of the Elari Dominion's power, now lay in ruins, but it was still standing, a last bastion of hope. Soren's heart raced as she and Elias moved through the remnants of the royal corridors, making their way to the central command room. She had always been told that a ruler's strength lay in their ability to remain calm in the face of disaster. But right now, all she could feel was a deep, gnawing fear. Fear for her people. Fear for everything she had lost. But then Elias' steady presence beside her calmed her. His hand, warm and reassuring, was always within reach. He hadn't left her side once, not since the moment they had decided to fight back. "We're almost there," Elias said, his voice steady, though she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Soren nodded, though her thoughts were far from the command room ahead. She was no longer just a princess, no longer a ruler of a people who had turned their backs on her. She had discovered a new side of herself in this fight. She had discovered what it meant to truly lead, not with power, but with heart. The command room loomed ahead, and as they entered, Soren's eyes swept over the figures gathered there. The Elari generals, once proud and sure, now looked worn and broken. They had fought hard, but the Karth were relentless. The enemy's numbers were overwhelming, and the Elari had no answer to the massive Karth war machines now descending on the capital. "Your Highness," one of the generals said, his voice tinged with desperation, "we've lost contact with the outer defenses. The Karth are in full control of the city." Soren swallowed hard. "We're not finished yet," she said, trying to muster strength. "We have one last chance. We fight for the palace. We fight for Lumeris." The room was silent. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. There was fear in their eyes, fear of failure, fear of what would happen if they lost. But Soren stood taller than she ever had before. She was no longer a fragile princess, unsure of her place. She was a warrior, a leader, and for the first time the generals seemed to see it too. They nodded slowly, their faith in her returning. "We'll fight with you, princess," the general said, "but we need more than courage, we need a strategy." Soren's mind raced. The Karth were fierce, but they were not invincible. There had to be a way. She had to believe there was still hope. Her thoughts were interrupted when Elias stepped forward. "I think I have an idea," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. He had always been the one with the quick solutions, the one who could think outside the box. Soren trusted him more than anyone. He outlined a plan quickly, explaining how they could use the palace's old defense systems, the ones that had been shut down when the city's power grid failed, to create a trap. It was a dangerous plan, risky even, but it was their only shot. "We can force the Karth into the central courtyard," Elias said, "and use the old defense cannons to strike them down." Soren nodded. She didn't hesitate. "Do it." The generals looked at each other, uncertain, but they could see the determination in her eyes. Slowly, one by one, they began to prepare for the final stand. Elias and Soren worked together, quickly organizing the palace's remaining forces. As they moved through the hallways preparing the plan, Elias caught Soren's arm. She turned to him, meeting his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. "We don't know how it'll end. This could be the last fight." Soren's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if they would win or if they would lose everything. But in that moment, standing in the wreckage of everything she had known, she realized something. "I've spent my whole life being told who I should be," she said softly, "but I've never been told who I could be, until now." Elias looked at her, his expression softening. "You're not alone anymore, Soren. You don't have to do this by yourself." She reached out her hand, finding his. "I don't want to." They stood there for a moment, their fingers intertwined, the weight of the world on their shoulders. But in that quiet, there was also something else, something strong. Something that told her they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next. "I don't want to fight alone either," Soren whispered. "But if we're going to lose, we lose together." Elias smiled, his gaze full of love and loyalty. "We will fight together, Soren, no matter what." Soren took a deep breath, nodding. "Then let's do it." The final battle for Lumeris had begun. The palace, now their last stronghold, would be the last place they would stand. But Soren knew something now that she hadn't known before. It didn't matter what happened next. What mattered was that she wasn't fighting for a title anymore. She was fighting for something real, something worth saving. As they prepared for the final assault, Soren turned to Elias, her heart pounding with something more than fear. She had always feared losing everything, her people, her place, her future. But now, she realized that in fighting for her people, in fighting alongside Elias, she had found something even more important, herself. "Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "will you be my spouse?" His eyes widened in surprise, but then he smiled, a warmth in his gaze that made her heart swell. "I've always been with you, Soren. Yes, yes, I will." And in that moment, under the dying light of Lumeris, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The final battle had come and gone. The Karth forces had been relentless, but they hadn't counted on the strength of the people of Lumeris, nor the courage of a princess who had once been told she wasn't enough. But Soren had proven them all wrong. The battle had raged for hours, but in the end the trap they had set worked. The Karth were forced into the central courtyard where the old defense cannons, long dormant, were reactivated by Elias. The blast was enough to scatter their forces, and with the help of the remaining soldiers, they pushed the invaders back. Slowly but surely, the tide had turned. And now, standing amidst the rubble of what was once the grandest city in the galaxy, Soren and Elias were the last two left standing in the courtyard. The battle was over. The Karth had retreated, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lumeris was free. Soren's breath came in ragged gasps, her body bruised and bloodied from the fight, but her heart was full. The war had taken its toll, but it had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. She had fought for her people, yes, but in the end she had fought for herself too. Elias stood beside her, equally exhausted but unshaken. His hand found hers, and for a brief moment they simply stood there, surrounded by the echoes of the battle that had shaped them both. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Elias smiled, though his eyes were tired. "We did, together." Soren turned to look at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite put into words. She had always known that Elias was different from the others. He had never looked at her as a princess, as a symbol of power. He had always seen her as just Soren, and that was what had made all the difference. In him, she had found more than a protector. She had found someone who believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. For so long, she had been afraid of what would happen if she failed. Afraid of the weight of her destiny, the pressure of living up to the expectations of her people. But Elias had shown her that strength wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about fulfilling some grand destiny. It was about fighting for what you believed in, even when it seemed impossible. Soren squeezed Elias' hand, her eyes searching his. "Elias, will you stay with me? After all of this, will you stay by my side?" His smile widened, and without hesitation he answered, "I never left you, Soren. I'm right here. And I always will be." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had cried too many times before. This time, the tears were for something else, something beautiful. They were tears for the future, for the new life they could build together, away from the shadows of the past. The people of Lumeris had gathered in the square, their faces battered but filled with hope. Word had spread quickly about the victory, about how the princess, who had once been rejected, had led them to freedom. They hailed her not just as royalty, but as the hero who had saved them all. Soren stood tall in front of them, her heart full as she looked out over the crowd. They had fought for their survival. They had fought for their home. But in doing so, they had reminded her of something she had forgotten, that she was not alone. She had never truly been alone. Elias stood at her side, his hand still holding hers. The two of them faced the crowd together, and for the first time, Soren wasn't afraid. Her voice rang out strong, carrying across the square. "We have won today, but we are not just victors in battle, we are victors in life. We have fought not just for the future of Lumeris, but for the future of each and every one of us. No matter who we are, no matter where we come from, we are Lumeris, and we are strong." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices a powerful testament to what they had overcome. For the first time in a long time, Soren felt the weight of the crown she wore not as a burden, but as a symbol of her people's resilience. She had found her place, not through bloodlines or titles, but through the fight for something worth living for. Later that night, as the fires from the battle smoldered and the stars began to fill the sky, Elias and Soren stood together on the palace balcony, looking out over the city that had been both their home and their battleground. "We did it, didn't we?" Soren said softly, her head resting on Elias' shoulder. "We really did." Elias kissed the top of her head. "We did, and this is just the beginning, Soren." She smiled, the weight of the world finally lifting from her shoulders. "I'm not afraid anymore, not with you by my side." Elias looked down at her, his expression full of love. "And I'll always be here, no matter what comes next." Soren nodded, her heart light. The future was still uncertain, but with Elias by her side, she knew that whatever it held, they would face it together. And so, the legend of Soren, the princess who had been rejected and turned away, spread across the stars. Not as a story of a fallen kingdom, but as a tale of courage, loyalty, and love. A story of how a human and an Elari princess had saved a world and found their place in it, side by side. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. Together they had found their future. Together they had found their home.